Could it be that your addiction is actually a gift to you and your church? That you're better off for having to face it and your church is better off as well? Today on Pastors on Porn, the gift of your addiction. Well, Vern here once again. I want to say thank you for joining me in this podcast. And I just want to say I am with you in your struggle as a pastor to be both true to the call of God on your life, but also I'm with you in your battle with sexually addictive behaviors. Again, I'm a fellow pastor like you. I'm currently pastor, but I'm also a fellow struggler. Even though it's been just about 2 years now where I've gained a new sense of, or a fuller sense of traction in my own journey of freedom, it doesn't mean that my struggle has ceased. Rarely a day goes by where I don't think about looking at porn, for example, and returning to those exciting but deadly images, deadly for my soul. So each and every day, I need to renew myself on this recovery journey. So I began this podcast by making this crazy statement that your struggle with porn or other addictive behaviors could actually be a gift to you and your church. How could I make that statement? Well, first of all, I'm not saying that your addictive struggles has not resulted in a cost to your life and in your life. Even if you're carefully hiding and have been carefully hiding your behaviors, it has brought damage to your marriage, your soul, and your church. The damage may not be visible, but it has robbed you of your ability to be present with God, to your wife, and others around you, including your family. And I'm not minimizing that. If some of your sinful behaviors have become known, I think it's safe to assume that it's also caused a lot of hurt to those closest to you, starting, of course, with your wife. But anyone who's placed their trust in you or looked up to you, or maybe one of your kids, for example. So when I say your addictive struggles can be a gift, I'm not excusing your behaviors or not saying that I know you need to deal with it squarely. It would be like finding out that you have operable cancer. The diagnosis in itself would be a gift, even though the cancer is not. Now, where I'm going with this whole idea of addictions as a gift is searching for the redemptive lessons that God wants to do in and through your life because of where you are right now. One of the biggest traction points in my own recovery has been my daily walks that I've taken and listening to recovery podcasts, using my winter driving guide that I've been working with in a course I'm writing. They've acted as a bit of studs on winter tires. Up in Canada and winter driving, that might make some sense to you if you're in California or Florida. Bear with me here. But for those of you who are used to winter driving, podcasts have given me some of the traction tools that I've needed in my own journey. And I heard a podcast recently that I think underscores this whole idea that your addiction could be seen through this gift paradigm. Podcast I'm referring to is one of my favorites. It's called The Power of Purity with Tony Agracia. And on a recent podcast, he interviewed the grandson of Billy Graham, whose name is Tullian Chavidian. I might have his last name wrong. But anyways, he was a mega church celebrity pastor, author of 6 or 7 or 8 books. And despite all of that success, his ministry crashed and burned when he was caught in an affair and his secret life became public. Now, I'm not advocating for you to go out and commit to a spectacular implosion of your life and ministry, but I did find some of the thoughts that he expressed deeply instructive, and they reinforce my belief that something good has come from my battle with sexual sin. And I believe something good and redemptive can come out of your own struggle with brokenness as well. So let me give you 2 or 3 ways that I think this whole struggle, this addictive struggle, can be a gift to you. Here's the first one. I think the first gift is that my addictive struggle has given me a deep awareness of my own sinfulness. I mean, there's times where I actually start to believe that I'm a pretty good guy. In fact, I've had quite a few people tell me I'm a pretty good guy. People like to compliment me that I'm a good guy. And there's times where I almost can start to believe it, almost to the point of going, God, I think I can take it from here. And, you know, that's just not true. And Tullian said in that podcast, he said this: I'm far more sinful and needy and desperate and weak than I ever wanted to believe about myself. This understanding, he said, sets me free to recognize my weakness, my sin, and my neediness, and forces me outside of myself for hope and security and the significance that I long for. If humility is a preamble for God's grace, which biblically in James it is, then frankly, nothing has taught me deeper humility than my inability to overcome the sexual compulsivity I find going on in my own life that I could not overcome. In this way, I think I would very much believe that my failures have taught me far more than my successes. Whether or not you're a tulip guy that goes along with total depravity, or you think you have some elements of good in you because you carry God's spirit or his image with you. I don't want to go down that rabbit hole, but all I know is that my struggles brought me to a place of deep neediness, which I think, methinks, is a good spiritual place to be. I think it's Tony that said on that podcast, the pig pen is a beautiful place. It is in the pig pen that we become aware of how much we need God after all. Tullian says these are some of the deep spiritual lessons he learned out of failure. And to go back, I would say, yes, it's very true that failure can teach us far more than success can. So listen to what he says. Success made me cocky. Failure gave me compassion. Success made me proud. Failure gave me much needed humility. Success made me think I was big. Failure made me realize I was small. Success fueled my love for me. Failure fueled my love for others. Success made me trust me. Failure made me trust God. Success brought me fans, but failure brought me friends. That's quoting Tullian in the podcast. So that's the first gift that I think is it brings me to a deep awareness of my own sinfulness, my own desperate need for God. When I meet together with men or pastor people in the church, I meet one-on-one with them. I love to ask men, this simple question. I say to them, tell me, what is it in your life that brings you to a deep awareness of your own need? That causes you to get up in the morning and go, God, oh God, if it's not for your grace, I am not going to make it today. The people, the guys that scare me are the ones that look at me with a bit of a blank look in their face and go, I don't know, what are you talking about? Because they don't recognize truly and fully their deep, deep sinfulness and need for God. Here's the second gift that I think that our addictive struggles and my sexual compulsions brought me to my life. And this now brings us squarely into our experience of who God is in our own brokenness. Again, to quote Tullian, he talks about the radicality of God's grace and the unconditionality of God's love when we've reached the end of our rope. And I would say that the place of desperation and the crashing in of God's goodness should wreck us. The spiritual contrast between our desperate neediness and the goodness of God should wreck us for a lifetime. Timothy Keller makes this quote that I love to share, and I think it sums us up more than any other quote I've heard recently. It says this: the gospel is this: we are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. That's the first lesson. Here's the second lesson. Yet at the very same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. That's so good. I'm going to share that one more time. The gospel is this: We are more sinful and flawed in ourselves than we ever dared believe. Yet at the same time, we are more loved and accepted in Jesus Christ than we ever dared hope. Does it mean that you go out and deliberately screw up your life to experience God's unconditional love? Of course not. It's like, should we go and sin all the more so that grace abounds all the more? That's crazy. But God's love does bring amazing good out of failure. He brings compassion out of our struggles, and he brings new hope out of the wreckage that our actions have brought. A third way that I would say that our addictions and our struggles can be a gift has to do with the way that we see the church and the way I believe I and you will pastor the church you are in, if you allow that to do its work. First of all, let me speak at a personal level. I know we are naturally concerned if people knew more about us or too much about us or our real struggles, they would reject us or hold it against us. Now, I don't know the people in your church, but I bet I know the people in your community. I bet they're sinners. I bet they struggle with pornography. I bet they struggle with alcohol and drugs and prescription medication. I bet they struggle with eating disorders and shame and anger and depression and mental illness and maybe a few others. That's if they're like the people in my community. I know that because that's the universal human condition. To quote Gerald May in his book Addictions and Grace, to be alive is to be addicted. And to be addicted is to stand in need of grace. So I know that your community, because it's probably filled with humans, like it is in my community, people with deep needs and deep brokenness. And if you are if you are a leader, to quote the late John Wimber, who talks about being a leader with a limp, then I think you actually become a safer place for people rather than somebody who most people would reject. I believe they will trust you at a deeper level because they know you also struggle. Yeah, there's right and wrong ways, and maybe in a future podcast we'll talk about ways for you to begin to share or become more transparent about your life and ministry. But let me say this, at a core level, never ever let it ever come to believe this, that it disqualifies you from shepherding others. It does not. Every recovery ministry that has been successful has realized that the most effective person to help lead another in recovery is somebody who has gone through the same thing. It's only in the church that we think that doesn't apply, and we try to get people who've never struggled helping people who struggle or who claim they've never struggled. That might be closer to the truth. I recently had been reading and following a ministry that said they would help people with porn and porn struggles, and somewhere in that conversation or reading about that person, they said, well, it's not really my struggle. And I just said, you know what, I don't really want to learn from that person. I'm not buying it. They don't get it. They don't understand what I'm going through. And when people come to you and they know that you struggle with one thing or another, they will know in you that there is a common fellow struggler. Tullian says this, we are in a time of the Christian church where stories of failure are much more important than stories of success. I was recently listening to a Transforming Center podcast with Ruth Haley Barton, and she made this disturbing statement, I thought. I'm going to put it in the form of a question. I'm just paraphrasing it. It was this: why does the church's view of success match up so directly with the same view of success of the larger world around us? Flannery O'Connor says this: the operation of the church is entirely set up for the sinner, which creates much misunderstanding among the smug. Tullian says, where do we get the idea that church is for the morally fit, not for the guilty and the broken and the bad? And I love in that podcast because then Tony throws in his own thing. He says, it's like a body shop. A body shop is meant to fix up smashed up, damaged, dent cars. Imagine somebody bringing a car in, and the people are offended by the fact it's full of dents, or maybe the owner. The owner or the shop manager brings his car up, and people go, "What are you doing? How could you dare bring your own car in because it's smashed? It's smashed as well." Listen and read scriptures. One of the biggest defenses of the inspiration of Scripture, Old and New Testament, but just think about the Old Testament stories, because the stories reveal the failures of its authors and the chief characters without image management. Tullian, who has been reflecting on his time in the church, he's asking people, outside the church, he asked this question: is church the first place or the last place you would go to if your secrets or your darkest secrets were exposed? Let me say that again. I messed it up. Is church the first place or the last place you would go if your darkest secrets were exposed? Everybody said it's the last place I would go. And then he asked this question: isn't it interesting that probably the very last place where people still use the word sin and understand sin is the place where people are least likely to confess sin? The church is supposed to be a hospital for the spiritually sick, but it has a reputation more as a gym for the morally fit and healthy. Its reputation, finally, Tullian says, is a place where good people gather, not bad people. So I think your struggle can be a gift. Now, it might wreck you as a gift because it will cause you to think of church and your role in church in a very different, and I would say a more biblical light. Our church has a neon sign on the window that says grace on tap. It's borrowing a phrase from Philip Yancey's book, What's So Amazing About Grace, which was just one of the best books I've ever read. And I think one last Tullian quote here. He says, religious leaders have always been skeptical of the sort of promiscuous distribution of God's grace to those who are bad. And I've seen that. I've had a number of people who've been so bothered by our sign grace on tap because that just means people can do whatever they want. They're always wanting to limit it or qualify it or put a Bible verse to it because it's just too indiscriminate or too promiscuous, almost, so to speak. Now, if I'm in a proper mood, I will qualify or describe grace to them to mollify them a little bit. Grace for me is the empowering presence of God that will enable you to do everything He's called you to do and be everything He's called you to be. But, I just want to say, I believe that God's grace is on tap for you in your life. And I think that if you allow your struggles to truly, you allow God to do His work through your struggles, it will make you more truly human because you will become more aware of how needy you are. It will make you more of a compassionate pastor because you will recognize the depths to which you've been forgiven. And it will make you more of a source of hope to others because you can become a trophy to God's amazing grace, His grace which is on tap for you. So I want to say God bless you today. And if you'd like to connect with me, my email is bandofbrothers@shaw.ca. That's bandofbrothers, plural, at shaw.ca. I'd love to hear from you. God bless.